Welcome to Trendy Flix, your ultimate destination for the latest in movies, TV shows, and streaming trends. Subscribe now and stay ahead of the entertainment curve.
Inside the decades-long struggle that made the Caitlin Clark phenomenon possible. In 1990, 34-year-old Carol Stiff, a basketball junkie who spent years coaching small college ball in the Northeast, packed away her clipboard and took an entry-level programmer position at what she considered a little company in Bristol, Connecticut. Basketball had long been a part of Stiff's life. Her uncle Don Donoher was one of Bobby Knight's assistant coaches on the 1984 Olympic gold medal winning team led by Michael Jordan. By middle school, she was playing youth basketball in Bernardsville, New Jersey, and one of her fondest memories was going to Madison Square Garden as a teenager with her mom in 1977 to watch Montclair State star Carol Blazejowski as part of a doubleheader called the Hanover Classic. It was the rare opportunity to see the top competitors play the game Stiff loved. Despite an 11 a.m. tip-off, there was a crowd of over 10,000 people in MSG to see Blaze, whose scoring prowess and all-around game drew comparisons to Pete Maravich. Blaze could shoot. She could pass. She played with flair. Even without a three-point line, she scored 52 points. All of a sudden a light bulb went off, Stiff said of the game. It showed her that the women's game could thrive under the right circumstances. At her high school, after the boys' team received Converse Chuck Taylors, the girls did, too, thanks to Title IX. But even that highlighted her beloved sports plight, it was rarely viewed as worthy enough on its own. But when the circumstances were right, its greatness could be seen. Stiff played basketball and field hockey at Southern Connecticut State. Then, following coaching stints at Brown, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Western Connecticut, she joined ESPN. One of her first tasks at the network was to input 4-digit codes for all the programming, recording what was on each hour. She noticed that the format didn't distinguish if games were played by men or women. In her third year, during a software redesign, she convinced her boss they should add a gender code. It was the first time the network tracked when women's sports were on, or not, at the network. Last April, the NCAA Women's National Championship game between undefeated South Carolina and Iowa in Cleveland drew nearly 19 million television viewers, the largest audience in women's college basketball history, and the most watched basketball game, men's or women's, since 2019. Earlier games in the 2024 women's tournament drew 14.2 million and 12.3 million viewers, respectively, and those followed a 2023 final watched by nearly 10 million, which had been an all-time high. Why the interest in women's basketball spiked is no mystery: the immense popularity of Caitlin Clark, the former Iowa and current Indiana Fever star. There's Michael, Jordan, Tiger, Woods, and Caitlin, said Fox president of Insight and Analytics Mike Mulvihill. But before Clark turbocharged the awareness and popularity of women's basketball, a foundation had to be built, ready and waiting for someone like her. It was constructed by people like Stiff, devotees of the game who long believed the structure and biases of the media business were holding it back. They pushed for more, fought for change, and set the stage on which Clark arrived. That stigma that was hanging over women's sports for so many years, that it's not athletic, it's not fun to watch, it's less than men's, is being lifted, said Sue Marriott, the Big Ten Network's vice president of remote productions. I think it all started with exposure. People weren't watching because it wasn't televised. In her third year at ESPN, and just weeks before the 1993-94 college basketball season began, Stiff was tasked with constructing ESPN's women's broadcast schedule. She assigned the games for each conference in the time slots she was given, typically Sunday afternoons. A year later, the slots given to her included a 3 p.m. ESPN spot on Martin Luther King Day in January. At the time, it was not considered coveted real estate, but Stiff wanted to make the most of it. After first failing to get defending national champion North Carolina to agree to a game against UConn, an up-and-coming program in nearby stores, Stiff called Pat Summitt, Tennessee's coach. Summit had concerns about fitting the game on her schedule and didn't love the idea of taking her team north in the winter. Stiff made her pitch, sounding like a coach trying to reel in a big recruit, noting that Robin Roberts, a former Division I player and an up-and-coming TV star, would be calling the game. Summit finally agreed to do it, for the good of the game. The teams entered undefeated, with UConn ranked number 1 and Tennessee number 2. A sold-out crowd of 8,241 saw the Huskies beat the Volunteers, 77-66, and the contest recorded a strong 1.0 rating, 635,000 households. It was the first game in what would become the greatest rivalry in women's college basketball history. However, there were no post-game interviews. A repeat of The Sports Reporters had to be rushed onto ESPN. On November 30, 1996, 30-year-old Brent Clark and 27-year-old Ann Nitze were married at St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church in West Des Moines, Iowa. The next day, the Iowa and Iowa State women's basketball teams resumed their rivalry after a 5-year break at Carver Hawkeye Arena in Iowa City. The Hawkeyes won, 64-53, before an announced crowd of 5,061. The game was not televised. During the 1994-95 women's college basketball season, Connecticut went 35-0 en route to a national championship, becoming only the second women's team to complete a season undefeated. The team's star, Rebecca Lobo, was the most visible women's basketball player since USC's Cheryl Miller in the 1980s. Lobo appeared on Late Night with David Letterman, and she and her teammates were featured on the Live with Regis and Kathy Lee morning show. As a kid, Lobo watched women's basketball every chance she got. Which means I didn't watch it at all, she said. She cut out pictures of Miller from Sports Illustrated and placed them in her locker. As the 1996 Olympics approached, Lobo had become something never seen before in the women's game, a bona fide media sensation, even if she was a bit player on the star-studded Team USA. The U.S. women won gold, boosting the launch of the WNBA the next year. The first WNBA season consisted of 28 regular season games split between NBC, ESPN, and Lifetime. There were 3 playoff games, with the one-game semifinals simulcast on ESPN and Lifetime, while the finals were on NBC. That same year, ESPN won the broadcast rights to the NCAA Women's Championship, taking it from CBS. Over the years, CBS turned out some big numbers, most notably with 11.84 million viewers for the 1983 final featuring Miller. However, the network failed to grow the game. ESPN won the rights by offering to air more games and by being willing to have a day of rest for the teams between the national semi-finals and the final, which Stiff and others